That ID could be anything. You people will print anything these days. Sergeant Kevin Harper didn't even look at the badge. He knocked it from Marcus Reed's hand with the back of his wrist and let it hit the Briarwood sidewalk like trash. With no time to spare, Harper's handcuffs clicked shut on Marcus's wrists on a public sidewalk in broad daylight, the badge still on the ground and arms locked behind his back. Marcus said nothing. His jaw was tight and his eyes were steady. He just complied silently and walked where they directed him. Sergeant Harper had no idea he had just handcuffed a veteran FBI agent or that one missed phone call was already setting everything in motion. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you can't miss. The coffee had gone cold. Marcus Reed hadn't touched it. He sat in the corner booth of Sam's Diner, back against the wall, eyes forward, watching the street through the plate glass window like a man who got paid to notice things, which he did. Had for many years with the FBI. Outside, Briarwood County, Alabama, moved at its Saturday afternoon pace. A couple walked a dog past a barber shop. A teenager on a bicycle swerved around a pothole. The sun sat heavy and bright over the main street, baking the sidewalks white. Marcus saw none of it. He was watching the building across the street. The Briarwood County Sheriff's Department sat squat and brick-faced on the opposite corner. An American flag hung limp above the entrance in the still afternoon air. 2 cruisers were parked out front. The blinds on the second floor were angled just enough to let someone look down at the street without being seen doing it. Marcus had noticed that detail from the start. He was dressed like nobody. Jeans, a gray button-down shirt, running shoes, no badge visible, no gun visible, just a black man in a diner booth with cold coffee and a folded newspaper he hadn't read. That was the point. For some time, he had been exactly that, nobody. A contractor, supposedly from Birmingham, bidding on a county road resurfacing project. He had shaken hands and smiled and asked the right dull questions about gravel grades and drainage specs. He had been polite and forgettable. And the whole time, he had been watching the money move. Operation Briarwood Ledger had started some time ago in a field office conference room in Birmingham. A cluster of financial reports, a pattern of asset forfeitures that made no sense on paper, and a question nobody in the state had been willing to ask out loud. How does a county sheriff's department seize over $2 million in cash and property from black residents over several years, file the correct paperwork every single time, and have almost none of it appear in official accounts afterward? Marcus had been assigned to find the answer. He thought about his scheduled check-in call with his partner, Pat Ellis, back at the Birmingham field office. He reached for the coffee out of habit, remembered it was cold, and set it back down. That was when he saw them. 2 deputies came around the corner on foot, not moving fast, not moving slow, just walking with the particular kind of purpose that looked casual but wasn't. Sergeant Kevin Harper was in front. Marcus had learned the names of every active deputy in this department early on. Harper was broad across the shoulders, with a jaw that always looked like it was working on something. His partner, Deputy Ryan Mitchell, was younger, and he moved a half-step behind Harper like a man who had learned to follow before he learned to lead. They were positioning themselves at both ends of the diner's front entrance. Marcus was already standing. He left some cash on the table for the coffee he hadn't drunk. Old habit, didn't matter, and walked to the door. He pushed it open and stepped into the afternoon heat and faced both of them before either one could speak first. "My name is Marcus Reed," he said. His voice was level, unhurried. "I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a veteran out of the Birmingham field office. My partner is Agent Patricia Ellis, Birmingham field office." He produced his badge and federal ID in one smooth motion, holding them out so both men could see. "I'm conducting a federal investigation in this county. I'd like to speak with your senior officer on duty right now." Mitchell looked at the badge. Harper barely did. Harper's eyes moved from the credentials to Marcus's face with the slow, deliberate drag of a man who had already decided something before he walked over here. His expression didn't change. There was no surprise in it, no uncertainty, no flicker of the kind of doubt a man feels when he realizes he might be making a serious mistake. That was the part that told Marcus everything he needed to know. Harper said, "That ID could be anything. You're going to need to come with us." Marcus looked at him for a moment, just a moment. "I'm advising you one time," Marcus said, quiet, steady, the way a man speaks when he doesn't need to raise his voice to mean it. "What you are about to do will end your career." Harper reached for his handcuffs. The click of the cuffs was loud on the quiet street. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood with his hands locked behind his back on a public sidewalk in broad daylight, badge and federal ID still on the ground where Harper had knocked them when he grabbed his wrists. And he felt something settle deep in his chest. Not fear, not panic, recognition. He had known this moment was possible. He had not known it would actually happen. There was a difference between knowing something and living it, and the distance between those two things was exactly one pair of handcuffs. Mitchell bent down and picked up the badge and ID. He looked at them for a moment longer than he needed to. His jaw was tight. He handed them to Harper without a word. Harper didn't look at them. He pocketed them like they were a parking ticket. "Let's go," he said. A woman coming out of the hardware store 2 doors down stopped on the sidewalk and stared. An old man on a bench across the street looked up from his newspaper. Marcus walked between the 2 deputies in handcuffs, and not one person said a word, and the afternoon just kept going around them like nothing unusual was happening at all. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the cuffs, the silence. Inside the sheriff's department, the air was cold and smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. A desk sergeant looked up when they came through the door. His eyes went to Marcus's face, then to the handcuffs, then back to his computer screen. Harper walked Marcus to the processing desk. "Suspicious individual," he said to the sergeant. "Possible fake federal credentials. Hold him for verification." "I am a federal agent," Marcus said, calm, clear. He looked directly at the desk sergeant when he said it. "Special Agent Marcus Reed, FBI, Birmingham Field Office. My partner is Agent Patricia Ellis. The number for the Birmingham Field Office is listed in any federal directory. One phone call will confirm everything." The sergeant opened his mouth. "Give us a minute," Harper said to him. The sergeant closed his mouth. He went back to his screen. That was when the side door opened. Deputy Chief Frank Donovan walked in like a man who had just happened to be passing by. He was thick through the middle with silver hair combed neatly to one side and a small American flag pin on his lapel. He had the kind of face that smiled easily and meant nothing by it. "Well now," Donovan said. His voice was warm, almost concerned. "What's going on out here? Some kind of mix-up?" "This individual was casing the building," Harper said. "Claims to be FBI." Donovan looked at Marcus the way a doctor looks at someone who has just said something confused, patient, slightly sad. "Sir, I'm sure we can get this sorted out real quick. If you'll just cooperate with my deputies, we'll have you on your way in no time." Marcus looked at him. "I've already cooperated. I identified myself, produced my credentials, and requested to speak with a senior officer. I would like to make a phone call." Of course, of course." Donovan waved a hand like the request was already being handled. "Let's just get you situated first." Situated. Marcus filed that word away. Donovan picked up the phone with one hand and produced a small notepad from his shirt pocket with the other. He dialed a number without looking anything up. No directory, no transfer. A number he already knew by heart. The phone rang once. He hung up. He shook his head slowly, like a man delivering unfortunate news. "No answer over at the Birmingham office," he said. "Must be the weekend skeleton crew." He tucked the notepad away and looked at Harper. "Go ahead and put him in holding until we can get somebody on the line to verify." "I want to speak to the sheriff," Marcus said. "Sheriff's not in today." Donovan smiled. "Don't worry, we'll get this cleared up." The holding cell was in the back, concrete floor, metal bench, a drain in the center. 2 other men sat against the far wall. One sleeping, one watching Marcus with tired, careful eyes. Marcus sat down on the bench. He put his forearms on his knees. He closed his eyes. He breathed in. He breathed out. That phone call Donovan made, dialed from memory, one ring, hung up, had not been to the Birmingham FBI field office. Marcus knew that the way he knew his own name. That call had been theater. Every second of it, theater. He had not missed a check-in call with Pat Ellis in all their time working together. She would notice soon. He started counting. The check-in window came and went. Pat Ellis sat at her desk in the Birmingham field office and watched the clock on her computer screen tick past the time Marcus was supposed to call. A short time passed, then a bit more. She picked up her phone and dialed his cell. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She hung up and dialed again. Same thing. Pat had been Marcus Reed's partner for years. In all that time, Marcus had never missed a check-in call. Not once. Not when he had food poisoning in a motel room in Savannah. Not when a source ran late, not for anything. The man was a clock. You could set your watch by his check-ins. She dialed the field radio frequency he was assigned for the operation. Nothing. She sat very still for a moment. Then she pulled up the cell tower tracking system on her computer and entered Marcus's number. The result came back quickly. His phone's last active ping was not at the road construction site where he was supposed to be. It was not at the motel where he was staying. The signal had gone dark inside a building at the corner of Main Street and Oak Avenue in Briarwood County. Pat knew that address. She had looked at it on a map many times over the course of the investigation. It was the Briarwood County Sheriff's Department. She was already reaching for her phone again. Rose Reed picked up on the second ring. She was a retired schoolteacher, and she had been married to a federal agent long enough to know that a call from his partner on a Saturday afternoon was not a social visit. "Pat," she said, just that. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness had a cost in it. "Rose, I need to ask you something quickly." Pat kept her voice even. "Did Marcus mention anything this week about watching the sheriff's department directly, being positioned near the building itself?" A pause. Short. "He said that was where the money was coming from. He said that's where he'd need to be watching." "Okay." Pat was already writing. "Thank you, Rose." "Pat," Rose's voice dropped a register. "Find him." "Yes, ma'am," Pat said. "That's exactly what I'm doing." She hung up and called Victoria Bennett. Assistant U.S. Attorney Victoria Bennett answered on the first ring, which told Pat she had been working. Pat did not waste time. "Marcus Reed missed his check-in a short while ago," she said. "His phone went dark inside the Briarwood County Sheriff's Department, the building he has been investigating. I need a federal court order, and I need bodies." A moment of silence. "Give me a few minutes," Victoria said. It took her little time. Pat moved through the field office the way water moves through a cracked dam, fast and without asking permission. She briefed 3 agents quickly. She contacted the U.S. Marshal's field office and had a marshal assigned and en route to the parking garage soon. She printed the federal court order the moment Victoria emailed it through, folded it into a manila folder along with every piece of documentation she had on Operation Briarwood Ledger, and was in the driver's seat of a federal vehicle with the engine running before long. The other agents loaded up around her. Nobody spoke much. They didn't need to. Every single person in that convoy understood what it meant when a federal agent's phone signal went dark inside the exact building he was investigating. It didn't mean a dead battery. It didn't mean a dropped call. It meant someone had decided to make a point. Pat pulled out of the parking garage and pointed the car south toward Briarwood County. The afternoon sun was already dropping toward the tree line. She drove with both hands on the wheel and her eyes straight ahead. And she thought about Marcus sitting in a booth watching that building through a diner window, and the quiet, careful way he worked, and the many years he had given to a job that asked everything and guaranteed nothing. She pressed the accelerator down a little harder. Soon after Marcus's missed check-in, Pat's convoy rolled to a stop in front of the Briarwood County Sheriff's Department. She stepped out with the folder under her arm. She did not look around at the building, did not slow down to read the sign above the door, did not hesitate at the bottom of the steps. She walked straight toward the entrance like a woman who had every right to take that building apart brick by brick. Victoria Bennett was directly behind her. The doors swung open and the room changed, not loudly, not with shouting or drawn weapons or any of the dramatic things people imagine when they picture federal officers walking into a sheriff's department. It changed the way a room changes when the temperature drops, quietly, completely, and all at once. Pat Ellis walked to the front desk. 3 FBI agents fanned out behind her. The U.S. Marshal stopped just inside the doorway with his arms at his sides. Victoria Bennett moved to Pat's left, folder open, court order already visible. The desk sergeant looked up. His eyes did a quick count of the windbreakers and the badges and the expressions on the faces wearing them. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't say anything. He just sat there with his hands flat on the desk, like a man waiting to be told what to do next. Frank Donovan appeared from the side hallway. He still had the warm face on, the pleasant, nothing-is-wrong face that Marcus had watched perform concern earlier. It held for a moment. Then it didn't. "Deputy Chief Donovan," Pat said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "I am Special Agent Patricia Ellis, FBI Birmingham Field Office. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Victoria Bennett." She placed the folder on the desk and turned it toward him. "That is a federal court order for the immediate release of Special Agent Marcus Reed. I need him in front of me soon." Donovan looked at the court order. He looked at Pat. He opened his mouth. "I can explain what happened here," he said. "There was a miscommunication. My deputies encountered an individual they couldn't verify, and they followed protocol." "Where is he?" Pat said. The pleasantness flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough. "Holding," Donovan said. "Cell 3. Take me there." The holding cell was in the back of the building. Past a row of filing cabinets and a bulletin board covered in shift schedules. Pat heard the cell before she saw it. The quiet. The specific kind of silence that only exists behind bars. Marcus was sitting on the metal bench with his forearms on his knees. He looked up when the door to the holding area opened. He looked at Pat, then at the marshal behind her, then back at Pat. Something passed across his face, not relief exactly, more like a man who had calculated a time and found out he was right. The cell was unlocked soon. Marcus stood. He straightened his shirt. He rolled his shoulders back once, slowly, and walked out of the cell without a word. Pat handed him his badge and federal ID, recovered from Harper before they came back, and he pocketed them in one clean motion. They walked back through the hallway, past the filing cabinets, past the bulletin board, and into the main room. Donovan was standing near the front desk. He had rearranged his expression back into something that resembled composure. He stepped forward slightly as Marcus came into the room, and he said, smooth and unhurried, like a man who believed the sound of his own voice could reshape a situation, "Agent Reed, I want to personally apologize for any confusion today. My deputies were following procedure." And Marcus stopped walking. He turned and looked at Donovan across the room. Just looked at him. No expression, no anger visible. Nothing that gave Donovan anything to push against or respond to. Donovan kept talking. The word misunderstanding came out of his mouth. Marcus held his gaze for a few seconds. The room was completely quiet. Nobody moved. Even the desk sergeant seemed to stop breathing. Then Marcus turned away, walked to the front door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the afternoon light. He had been in that cell for some time. Outside, the sun was lower now, the shadows longer across the main street. Marcus stood on the sidewalk and breathed in the open air and let it settle. Pat came through the door behind him and fell into step at his side. "Rose called me," she said, "when you missed your window." Marcus nodded slowly. He looked straight ahead. "How bad was it in there?" Pat asked. "Managed," he said. They walked toward the cars. After a moment, Marcus spoke again without looking at her. "That phone call Donovan made," he said, "the one where he got no answer at the Birmingham office. What about it?" "He dialed it from memory. One ring, hung up." He paused. "Find out whose number that was." Pat looked at him. "I already started," she said. The afternoon sun was still bright over Briarwood's main street. Marcus stood beside the federal vehicles in the parking lot while Pat opened her laptop on the hood and pulled up the cell tower records. She had run them during the drive down from Birmingham while the convoy was still moving, while Marcus was still in a holding cell counting his breaths. "It was quick," she said. She turned the screen toward him. Marcus looked at it. A call had been placed to Harper's personal cell phone in the afternoon, sometime before the two deputies had positioned themselves at Sam's diner. The call did not come from a citizen. It did not come from a dispatch line. It came from a landline registered to one specific extension inside the Briarwood County Sheriff's Department. Pat tapped the screen. That extension belongs to Donovan's private office. Marcus read the record twice. He straightened up slowly. There had been no citizen complaint, no patrol car rolling by and noticing something suspicious. Donovan had been watching from that second-floor window with the angled blinds, had seen Marcus outside the diner, and had picked up his personal phone and called his sergeant directly. This was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not two deputies doing their jobs badly. It was a targeted ambush of a federal agent conducting a federal investigation. "That's obstruction," Marcus said. "Federal felony," Pat said. "Yes." Marcus closed the laptop gently. He looked at the front door of the sheriff's department. Then he looked at Pat. "Where's Victoria?" Victoria Bennett was already inside. She had asked for Sheriff Lewis Underwood, the elected sheriff, Donovan's nominal boss, and had been told he was not in the building. She had called his personal cell herself, identified herself, and used the words federal obstruction charge in her first sentence. Sheriff Underwood arrived at the department soon. He was gray-haired, and he walked through the front door with the careful expression of a man who had spent his career making sure he never had to know certain things. He did not have that option anymore. Victoria walked him through it in the conference room off the main hallway. The cell tower record, the call timing, Donovan's private extension, the deliberate, directed nature of the arrest. She put the documentation on the table in front of him, one page at a time, and let each page do its work. She did not rush it. When she finished, the room was quiet. Sheriff Underwood looked at the pages on the table. He looked at the wall above Victoria's head. He was a man watching a bridge go out while he was standing on it. "Get them in here," he said finally. His voice was flat and tired. "Both of them." It took some time to locate Donovan and Harper in the building. They came into the conference room together. Donovan's face was composed. Harper was reading the room and not liking what he found. Sheriff Underwood stood behind his desk with Victoria Bennett to his right and did not offer either man a seat. He told them what had been found, the call record, the timing, the federal obstruction implications. He did not editorialize. He stated facts the way a man states facts when the facts are bad enough on their own. When he finished, Donovan started to speak. "Lewis, I can explain." "Badges," Sheriff Underwood said. "Both of you and your weapons on the desk." Donovan stopped talking. A muscle in his jaw moved once. "You are both placed on immediate unpaid administrative suspension," Victoria said, "pending a federal civil rights and obstruction investigation. Your department access is revoked as of this moment. You are not to enter this building, contact department personnel regarding this matter, or access any case files." Harper's hand went to his badge. It was shaking, not a little, shaking the way a hand shakes when the body understands something the mind is still catching up to. He unpinned it and set it on the desk with a sound that was somehow too loud in the quiet room. Donovan reached up slowly. He unpinned his badge with the careful, deliberate movements of a man refusing to show what the moment was costing him. He placed it on the desk gently, almost tenderly. Then he looked up. Not at Sheriff Underwood, not at Victoria. He looked toward the window, and through the glass in the parking lot below, Marcus Reed was standing beside the federal vehicles with his hands in his pockets watching the building. Donovan's jaw tightened. He looked away first. Sometime later, after the handcuffs clicked shut on a public sidewalk, two men walked out of the Briarwood County Sheriff's Department without badges, without weapons, and without jobs. The courthouse conference room smelled like old carpet and recycled air. Someone had dragged a whiteboard in from somewhere down the hall. Pat had covered half of it already. Names, dates, dollar amounts, arrows connecting one to the next. Marcus stood in front of it with his arms crossed and his coffee going cold again, which seemed to be a theme of his week. Outside the windows, Briarwood County had gone dark. The main street was quiet. The sheriff's department across town was running on a skeleton crew, and a cloud of tension that Marcus imagined he could still feel from here. Victoria Bennett sat at the head of the conference table, her jacket draped over the chair behind her, sleeves rolled to the elbows. She had a legal pad in front of her that was already half filled with notes written in the small, precise handwriting of a woman who did not waste space. "Let's go through what we have," she said. Pat turned to the whiteboard. Operation Briarwood Ledger had been running for some time. What started as a pattern of suspicious numbers, asset forfeitures that didn't add up, money that left the evidence room and never arrived in official accounts, had grown into something considerably uglier. Over a decade, Donovan's department had seized cash and property from black residents across the county using pretextual charges. Traffic stops that produced large amounts of cash, drug investigations with no arrests, property forfeitures tied to cases that were quietly dropped. The money, somewhere between the seizing of it and the recording of it, disappeared. "We're looking at a minimum of $2.3 million, Pat said. She circled a number on the whiteboard. "Probably more. We have documentation on dozens of individual seizures. Many of them targeted black residents. The racial pattern is not subtle." Marcus looked at the number on the board. $2.3 million taken from people who, in most cases, couldn't afford lawyers to fight back. He had read the individual files. A grandmother who lost thousands she had saved over many years. A small business owner who lost his work van. A young man who lost cash he had saved for his first month's rent on an apartment. Each case, individually, looked like routine law enforcement. Together, they looked like something else entirely. Victoria was writing on her legal pad when the knock came at the conference room door. The man in the doorway was elderly, short, wearing a brown suit that had been pressed carefully. He held a cardboard box against his chest with both arms, the way you carry something you have carried for a long time and are not ready to put down. The desk officer behind him said, He came in about an hour ago, asked to speak to whoever was in charge of the federal investigation, said it was important. It is important, the man said. His voice was unhurried and deep, the voice of someone who had spent decades standing in front of rooms full of people and meaning every word. My name is Reverend Daniel Harper. I pastor First Baptist Church a short drive from here. He looked at Marcus directly. I heard on the radio what happened to you today. I've been waiting for a long time for someone to show up in this county. I drove here the same hour I heard. Marcus stepped forward and held the door open. Come in, Reverend. Harper set the box on the conference table and lifted the lid. Inside were folders, dozens of them, packed in tight and organized by year, each one labeled in careful handwriting. Pat leaned forward. Victoria set down her pen. Several families, Harper said. Those are their complaints, going back a long time. Pattern arrests, false charges, property taken with no return, 2 young men pressured into statements they never should have signed. He placed one hand flat on top of the folders. Every one of those complaints was filed through the proper channels. Every one was documented, submitted, and recorded. He paused. Not one of them was ever acted on. The room was quiet. Marcus reached into the box and lifted one of the folders. He opened it. The first page was a handwritten statement from a woman named Dorothy Ellis, describing the seizure of her late husband's truck and the cash she had been carrying to pay for his funeral. He read it once. He closed the folder carefully. He placed it back in the box with both hands. He looked at Reverend Harper, this elderly man who had driven to a federal courthouse on the same day the news broke because he had been waiting for this moment. And something moved in Marcus's chest that he did not have a name for. Not quite grief, not quite reverence, something between the two. Then Pat's phone rang. She looked at the screen. She answered it, listened briefly, and hung up. Mitchell Baxter just filed his first motion, she said. He's been retained for Donovan and Harper. She set the phone down. His retainer alone is substantial. Victoria Bennett looked up from her legal pad. Someone with serious money just walked into this fight. Marcus looked at the box. He looked at Reverend Harper. Then we use everything in it, he said. Time had passed since the suspension. The investigation was moving. Pat had traced more forfeiture transactions back to shell accounts. Victoria had subpoenaed bank records for 2 county officials. Marcus had spent the week driving the county's back roads, visiting the addresses in Harper's folders, introducing himself at front doors with the quiet patience of a man who understood that trust had to be earned in places where it had been taken from. It was slow work, necessary work. He was at the courthouse one morning reviewing financial records with Pat when Victoria walked in with her phone held out in front of her like evidence. You need to see this, she said. She set the phone on the table and pressed play. The press conference was being held in the state capitol some distance north. The backdrop was a row of American flags. The podium had a seal on it. The man behind the podium had silver hair combed back from a broad forehead, a dark suit, and the particular kind of face that had been photographed enough times to know exactly what angle it looked best from. Congressman Peter Harlan, a longtime politician on the Judiciary Committee, the kind of politician who had been in office long enough that his name appeared on buildings. He was not shouting. He never shouted. Men like Harlan understood that the quieter you stayed, the more dangerous you sounded. What we are witnessing in Briarwood County, Harlan said, is a deeply troubling pattern of federal overreach into local law enforcement. Career officers, men who have served their communities for many years, are being suspended without due process, their reputations destroyed, their careers dismantled, before a single fact has been properly established. He paused and looked directly into the camera. I have known Frank Donovan for many years. He is a dedicated public servant. What is being done to him and his deputies is not justice. It is a politically motivated federal operation targeting good officers for doing their jobs. Another pause. I'm calling today for an independent review of the FBI's conduct in Briarwood County. The American people deserve to know when their federal agencies have been weaponized against the very communities they are supposed to serve. He said the phrase weaponized bureaucracy more than once. He never once mentioned that a federal agent had been handcuffed and put in a holding cell. He never mentioned Operation Briarwood Ledger. He never mentioned the seized money and individuals. Victoria reached over and stopped the video. The conference room was quiet for a moment. He arranged Baxter's retainer, Pat said. She had a file open on the table in front of her. We've been tracing the money since last night. It moved through a political action committee, Briarwood County Law Enforcement Support Fund, registered some time ago. The PAC received a large deposit days ago. The deposit originated from a donor, LLC, that traces back to a fundraising bundler who has worked exclusively for Harlan's campaigns for years. Marcus looked at the paused image on Victoria's phone, Harlan's face, mid-sentence, composed and righteous. "He's been Donovan's patron for many years," Marcus said. It was not a question. "Best we can document right now," Pat said. "Donovan has been delivering Briarwood County for Harlan in every election cycle for a long time. Voter turnout management, opposition research, making certain local problems disappear before they became state problems." She turned the page. "This isn't Harlan helping an old friend. This is Harlan protecting an investment." Marcus pushed back from the table and stood. He walked to the window. Outside, the courthouse parking lot was empty except for two pigeons working over something near the dumpster. He thought about the press conference, the careful language, the way Harlan had reframed the entire situation, turned a federal agent being put in a cell into a story about government overreach, turned the victim into the aggressor, turned Donovan into a martyr. It was skillfully done, the kind of thing that worked on people who were only half paying attention. He thought about the families in Harper's box. He thought about the grandmother who lost money she had saved over many years. He wondered if any of them were half paying attention to the news right now. If they saw that press conference, if they heard a longtime congressman standing in front of American flags and telling the country that the man who had taken their money and buried their complaints was a dedicated public servant. He turned back to the room. "How deep does the connection go?" he asked. "That's what we need to find out," Victoria said. "Then that's what we do next," Marcus said. "All of it. Every dollar, every favor, every phone call between them going back as far as we can reach." He looked at Pat. "Someone doesn't spend a lot on a lawyer for a friend. They spend it on a secret." Pat was already writing. Mitchell Baxter filed the emergency reinstatement motion on a morning. By the next day, it had been accepted. By soon after, a hearing date had been scheduled. The speed of it was not accidental. Emergency motions didn't move that fast on their own. They moved that fast when someone was pushing them. The hearing was set before State Administrative Judge Caroline Peterson. Victoria pulled her record the same night the date was confirmed. Peterson had been appointed to the administrative bench some time ago. The appointment had been championed publicly by Congressman Peter Harlan, who called her in a press statement a model of judicial temperament and fairness. Marcus read that twice and said nothing. The hearing convened in the morning in a wood-paneled room on the third floor of the county administrative building. Baxter was already seated when Marcus, Pat, and Victoria arrived. He was lean with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a yellow legal pad on the table in front of him that had almost nothing written on it. Men who were very good at this didn't need many notes. Victoria moved immediately to have the hearing open to the public. Judge Peterson denied it before the sentence was fully out of Victoria's mouth. Victoria stood at the table and said carefully that a public proceeding was standard practice in administrative suspension reviews of this nature, and that closing it set a troubling precedent for transparency. Peterson looked at her over her own reading glasses. "Motion denied, Counselor. Let's proceed." Pat, seated beside Marcus in the observer chairs along the wall, wrote one word on her notepad and tilted it toward him. "Predetermined." Marcus gave the smallest nod. Baxter argued for some time without raising his voice once. He was good. Marcus had known he would be good, but watching it in person was something else. Baxter built his case the way a careful man builds a wall, one brick at a time, each one fitted precisely against the last. No gaps, no wobble. Mitchell had encountered an individual whose credentials he could not verify through standard channels. He had followed departmental protocol for unverified identification claims. He had acted under the direction of a superior officer. The suspension was punitive in nature, not procedural, and had been imposed without proper administrative review. He never mentioned the cell tower record. He never mentioned Donovan's phone call to Mitchell's personal cell shortly before the arrest. He built an entire version of events that was technically accurate in every individual detail and completely false in every way that mattered. Judge Peterson watched him the way a person watches a movie they have already seen and enjoyed. Then Victoria stood up. She laid out the cell tower record, the call from Donovan's private extension, the precise timing, the fact that Mitchell's personal cell, not a dispatch line, had received a direct instruction from his superior before a single patrol car had moved. The targeted nature of the arrest, the federal obstruction implications. Peterson interrupted her early on, once to question the admissibility of the cell tower documentation, once to ask whether the federal investigation itself had been properly disclosed to the relevant state oversight body prior to the undercover deployment. Victoria answered both challenges cleanly and completely. Peterson moved on without acknowledging the answers. During the afternoon recess, Marcus sat in the hallway on a wooden bench outside the hearing room. The hallway was empty except for a janitor pushing a cart slowly toward the far end. Afternoon light came through a window at the corridor's end and lay in a long, pale rectangle on the floor. Marcus sat with his forearms on his knees. He looked at the rectangle of light. In his many years, he had learned to read rooms. He had learned to read judges and juries and witnesses and suspects, and the particular language that people spoke when they were trying not to say what they meant. He had read this room all morning. He knew what Peterson was going to do. He did not know yet how to stop it. That evening, the three of them sat in the courthouse conference room that had started to feel like a second office. Victoria dropped her legal pad on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface. Peterson took it under advisement, she said. The ruling could come soon. We have no way to know. Whatever she decides about Mitchell, Pat said, Donovan's federal obstruction charge is untouchable by this proceeding. That charge lives in federal court. Peterson has zero jurisdiction over it. Marcus looked at the whiteboard, at the numbers, at the names. Then we keep building, he said. Whatever she rules, we keep building. Nobody disagreed, but the room felt smaller than it had that morning. The withdrawals started quietly. Days after the hearing, Marcus got a call from Victoria. She'd been trying to schedule formal interviews with the families from Harper's complaint files. The families whose documented experiences formed the backbone of the civil rights portion of the investigation. Several of them had called back within a short window to say they were no longer able to participate. They used different words. The meaning was identical. Marcus asked Victoria if anyone had approached them directly. She said, "Not that anyone could prove." That was the point. He drove out to see Reverend Harper the next morning. They sat in the church office, a small room lined with bookshelves and smelling of old paper and lemonwood polish. Harper had a cup of tea he wasn't drinking. Marcus laid it out plainly. Families pulling back, the timing, the pattern. Harper nodded slowly, like a man hearing news he had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. "It started recently," he said. "I've been hearing things from the congregation. People are scared. Not the loud kind of scared, the quiet kind. The kind that comes from experience." "What are they seeing?" Harper set his tea down. "Deacon Williams runs a dry cleaning shop on Route 9. A deputy car has been parked across the street every morning this week. Just sitting there, engine running, not doing anything, just sitting." He folded his hands on the desk. "A young man named Sonny Gibbs. His mother attends service here every Sunday. Sonny is on parole. His officer showed up at his house unannounced recently for a routine check. Sonny wasn't due a visit for some time." Marcus was quiet. "And Sandra Mott," Harper continued. "She owns a small alteration shop downtown. A health inspector came by recently. First visit in years." He looked at Marcus steadily. "Nothing found, nothing cited. The man just walked around writing things on a clipboard and left. Different families, different methods. Nothing that could be filed as a complaint, nothing that could be traced to a specific order or a specific person, just the constant grinding reminder that certain people were watching, that certain people had reach, that certain people could make your life complicated in ways that were very difficult to explain to a federal attorney." Marcus understood what he was hearing. He had seen versions of it before in other counties, other cases. The machine didn't always use force. Sometimes it just leaned, quietly, persistently, in the specific places where the leaning would hurt most. He and Harper drove together to the Turner house that afternoon. Margaret Turner lived in a small yellow house at the end of a gravel road, set back from the street behind 2 oak trees that were older than the house. She answered the door in a house dress, a dish towel over her shoulder, and looked at Marcus with the careful, assessing eyes of a woman who had learned not to extend trust quickly. She let them in. She did not offer coffee. They sat in her living room. Family photographs covered the wall behind the couch. Weddings, graduations, children at various ages and various seasons. A life documented in frames. Marcus looked at those photographs while Harper explained why they had come. Margaret Turner listened with her hands folded in her lap. When Harper finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus. Not unkindly, just directly, the way a person looks at someone they have decided to be honest with. "I believe you mean well," she said. "I do. But I need you to understand something." She glanced at the photographs on the wall. "My son works at a warehouse some distance from here. My granddaughter catches a school bus on this road every morning. I have a business license that comes up for renewal soon. You are going to finish your investigation and drive back to Birmingham, and I'm going to be here. Same as I've always been. Same as these families have always been." The room was very quiet. Marcus did not offer her a guarantee he couldn't keep. He did not tell her it would be fine. He had too much respect for her to do either of those things. He said, "I hear you, Mrs. Turner. Everything you just said is true and fair, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She nodded once. He and Harper drove back to the church without speaking. That evening, Marcus told Pat and Victoria what he already knew, but now felt in his bones. The case had to stand on its evidence. The families who were pulling back were not failing anyone. They were surviving. He needed someone on the inside. Days after the Turner visit, Pat found Joshua Vance. She had been following a wire transfer chain for some time. County contractor's account to a private LLC to a personal savings account to a man who had retired from the Briarwood County Sheriff's Department after years as evidence room supervisor. The retirement had been quiet and quick. No ceremony, no department photograph, just a man who was there one week and gone the next. Joshua Vance was living comfortably in a house that his county pension alone could not explain. The grand jury subpoena was served on a morning. Vance arrived at the federal building in Birmingham with a private attorney and the careful, rigid posture of a man who had been rehearsing how to sit in a chair like this. He was heavy-set with close-cut gray hair and hands that stayed folded on the table in front of him the entire time, like he was keeping them somewhere he could watch them. He looked at Marcus once when he came in, then he looked at the table and mostly stayed there. But he talked. Once he started, he talked for hours. He described the asset forfeiture scheme from the inside out, the way seizures were selected, the way paperwork was filed to look clean, the way cash moved from the evidence room through a series of informal accounts before being divided. He was precise. He was detailed. He named Donovan many times. He named the county commissioner. He named 2 local judges who received regular payments through what was described as civic organization dues. And then, carefully in language that circled the edge of something without quite landing on it, he described receiving instructions through an intermediary, someone he referred to as a political friend of the department, someone whose instructions arrived not through official channels, but through a phone call to Donovan, after which Donovan would come down to the evidence room personally and tell Vance what needed to happen that week. He never said the name Harlan, but the description was detailed enough that everyone in the room heard it anyway. Marcus drove back to Briarwood that evening. He sat in the parking lot of the motel and called Rose. "It's looking good," he told her. He leaned back against the headrest. Outside, the Alabama night was warm and full of crickets. "I think I'll be home by the weekend." Rose was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll believe it when I see your car in the driveway." He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed in some time. The next morning arrived in pieces, each one worse than the last. The first piece, Judge Peterson issued her ruling in the morning. Ryan Mitchell was reinstated to active duty with full back pay, effective immediately. The ruling cited insufficient procedural grounds for the suspension and determined that Mitchell's actions had not demonstrably deviated from departmental protocol. Donovan's suspension was upheld. The federal obstruction evidence was too direct even for Peterson to dismiss. But Mitchell was back. By mid-morning, he was in the department parking lot in uniform. The second piece came from Pat soon after. She had been monitoring Vance out of caution. That morning, Joshua Vance had walked into a car dealership some distance outside Birmingham and purchased a Lexus sedan, cash. Pat had the dealer's transaction record on her screen when she called Marcus. Marcus called Vance's attorney. By midday, a letter had been submitted to the grand jury stating that Vance had overstated his certainty regarding the political intermediary. The testimony about Harlan's connection, thin as it already was gone. Someone had reached Vance overnight, someone with enough money to buy a man's recollection and enough sense to do it quietly. The third piece was the worst. Baxter filed a motion in the afternoon challenging the procedural validity of Operation Briarwood Ledger's undercover component. His argument was narrow and technical. The investigation's deployment had not been disclosed to the relevant state oversight body within the required window before Marcus went into the field. The gap was small. It was also real. The motion triggered a mandatory compliance review. All new warrants were frozen. All compelled testimony was suspended. The investigation was not dead, but it was in a box with a lid on it. Victoria called Marcus that night. Her voice was flat and controlled in the way that meant she was furious. She told him Baxter had known about the disclosure gap before they did. Someone inside the task force had fed it to him. Marcus drove to Reverend Harper's church and sat in the parking lot with the engine off and the windows down. The night was still warm. The crickets were still going. He thought about Margaret Turner. "You're going to leave. We're still going to be here." He sat there for a long time. He did not sleep. Marcus sat in the church parking lot until late. Then he drove to Birmingham, not to the field office, not to the motel. He drove to a diner off the interstate that stayed open all night and had bad lighting and good coffee, and he called Pat from the parking lot before he went inside. "I'm at the Waffle House off the interstate," he said. "Come meet me." Pat arrived shortly later. She slid into the booth across from him, still wearing the clothes she'd had on all day, her hair pulled back, a legal pad tucked under her arm. She looked at his face and didn't ask how he was doing. She ordered coffee and opened the pad. "Let's work," she said. That was why she was his partner. Marcus drew a line down the center of a paper napkin with a pen from his shirt pocket. On the left side, he wrote one word, "Gone." On the right side, he wrote another, "Still here." "The stay freezes new warrants," he said. "New testimony. Anything compelled going forward we can't touch for some time." He wrote those things on the left side. Vance's political testimony, gone. Mitchell reinstated. Witnesses withdrawn. Harlan connection, severed for now. He looked at the right side of the napkin. "What Baxter cannot touch," he said. Vance's financial testimony, everything he said about the money, the transfers, the accounts, the names, that's already in the grand jury record, sealed and protected. The stay doesn't reach backward. He wrote that down. Harper's complaint files, the families, years of documentation, independent evidence, never part of the undercover operation, untouchable. He wrote that. Donovan's federal obstruction charge lives entirely in federal court. Peterson never had jurisdiction over it. Baxter's motion doesn't affect it. He wrote that too. He set the pen down and looked at what he had. The right side of the napkin wasn't empty. It was thinner than he wanted, but it was not nothing. Pat was studying it. She reached over and tapped the word she had written in the margin of her legal pad while he was talking. One word, leak. "That's the center of it," she said. "Baxter knew about the disclosure gap before we did, that information existed in exactly one place, the task force procedural file. Mitchell had liaison access to that file for a short time some time ago. He accessed it." She turned the pad toward Marcus. Shortly after his access, he sent an email from his personal account to Baxter's firm, to a shell account managed through Baxter's firm. "Yes." She tapped the pad again. "The stay motion was built on information Mitchell stole from inside our own investigation and handed to the other side, which means the motion itself was built on tainted evidence." Marcus looked at her. "If we can document that chain," he said slowly, "Victoria can move to vacate the stay." "That's the play," Pat said. "We need Mitchell's carrier records, phone, email, everything from that time. We can get there through a targeted subpoena, narrow enough that it doesn't trigger the stay's restrictions because it's not compelled testimony. It's a third-party communication record." Marcus nodded. He looked at the napkin. Then he looked past it at the window, at the dark interstate sliding by outside. He thought about Mitchell, back in uniform, parked in his old spot, walking those hallways again, nodding at people he worked with like the last events had been a bad dream he had woken up from. But Mitchell had no Harlan behind him, no Baxter on retainer in his name. He had been Donovan's instrument, useful while Donovan needed him, expendable the moment Donovan needed someone to carry the weight. And Donovan, still suspended, still facing a federal obstruction charge that nothing in the recent events had touched, was looking at the future with the clear eyes of a man who understood that cooperation agreements existed for a reason. Mitchell was standing in a hallway between two doors and one of them was going to close. "There's someone else," Marcus said. Pat waited. "Mitchell's partner at the arrest. He was there when the cuffs went on. He looked at my badge and he looked away." Marcus turned the napkin over. A man looks away because he already knows something he doesn't want to know. That's not innocence. That's a conscience. Pat wrote the name down. Harper might know him, Marcus said. Briarwood's a small county. Everybody knows somebody. I'll ask him in the morning. Marcus looked at the napkin one more time. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket. We're not done, he said. Pat picked up her coffee. We were never done. Marcus drove back to Briarwood before the sun came up. He had slept little on the motel room bed without taking his shoes off, and woken early feeling like he had never closed his eyes at all. He splashed water on his face, drove through a gas station for coffee in a paper cup, and was on the road south before the Birmingham skyline had caught its first light. He pulled into Reverend Harper's church early. The lights were already on in the back. Harper was in the church kitchen making oatmeal when Marcus knocked on the side door. The old man looked at him, looked at the dark sky behind him, and stepped back to let him in without a word. He set a second bowl on the counter without being asked. They ate standing up. Marcus told him about the napkin, the leak, Mitchell's carrier records, the subpoena they were building. Harper listened with the focused stillness of a man who had learned to hear what mattered and let the rest pass. When Marcus finished, he asked his question. Is there anyone in that department who ever looked uncomfortable? Someone who showed a conscience even once? Harper was quiet for a moment. He turned his spoon in the bowl slowly. Ryan Mitchell, he said. Marcus set his coffee down. Donovan's partner, Harper continued. Born here, grew up near this church. His mother, Dora Mitchell, has sat in the same pew every Sunday for many years. Harper looked at Marcus steadily. After your arrest, Dora came to me privately, said her son hadn't slept since it happened, wouldn't tell her why, just said he'd seen something he couldn't get out of his head. Can you arrange a meeting? Harper considered it. I can ask Dora to ask him. Whether he comes is up to him. Soon, Marcus said. If possible, soon. Mitchell arrived at the church parking lot at dusk. He pulled in driving a personal truck, not a cruiser, and sat in the cab for some time before he got out. Marcus watched from the side doorway. Young, thin through the shoulders in a way that made him look younger than his age. He walked across the gravel with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on the ground in front of him. The walk of a man carrying something he had been carrying too long. Marcus stepped outside to meet him. They stood in the parking lot in the early evening air. Somewhere down the road, a dog was barking at something. The church windows threw pale yellow light across the gravel. Mitchell spoke first. I can't lose my job. His voice was tight. I have a wife. We have a young daughter. I need you to understand that before anything else. I understand it, Marcus said. I'm not asking you to do anything tonight except talk to me. Mitchell looked at him for a moment. Then he looked away. He took a breath. And he talked. He said that on the morning of the arrest, he arrived at the department for his shift and found Harper already there, which was unusual. Harper was never early. Harper was on his personal cell in the corner of the locker room, half turned away. Mitchell caught pieces of it. The words, the guy from the diner, the words Donovan says make it clean. Harper saw him listening and ended the call and said nothing about it. Then, when they were walking toward Sam's diner shortly into the shift, Harper said, unprompted and without any context, "This guy is going to give us some trouble. Don't say anything. Just follow my lead." Mitchell hadn't understood what that meant until he watched Harper put handcuffs on a man holding a federal badge. I should have said something, Mitchell said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He pressed his lips together. I know that. I've known it every day since. You're saying something now, Marcus said. Mitchell was quiet. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his personal cell phone. He held it out. On the screen was a text message from Harper sent some time ago, late enough that Marcus could picture exactly how it had been written. A man alone, scared, unable to sleep. The text read, If this goes federal, I had nothing to do with what H told me to do at the diner. I was following orders. You were there. You know, Marcus read it twice. He looked up. Has anyone else seen this? No. Will you file a voluntary witness statement? Mitchell wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He stood up straighter. My mother goes to this church, he said. Like that was the whole answer. Like that was all the reason a man needed. Marcus nodded slowly. That's enough, he said. Mitchell filed his voluntary witness statement the next morning. Marcus sat with him in the federal building in Birmingham for some time while Victoria Bennett's paralegal typed every word. Mitchell was precise and steady throughout. Steadier than Marcus expected. Steadier perhaps than Mitchell expected of himself. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He stated what he had heard, what he had seen, and what he had received on his personal phone, and he signed his name at the bottom of the pages without hesitating. When it was done, he stood and shook Marcus's hand. His grip was firm. "What happens now?" he asked. "We use what you gave us," Marcus said, "carefully and correctly, and we protect you in the process." Mitchell nodded once. He put his jacket on and left. Marcus watched him walk down the hallway and thought about the young daughter at home, and the many years his mother had sat in the pew, and what it cost a young man to walk into a federal building and sign his name to the truth. Pat had the subpoena for Mitchell's personal carrier records filed and approved before long. It was targeted and narrow, specific to Mitchell's personal phone and email accounts during his liaison assignment. Because it was a third-party communication record rather than compelled testimony, it existed outside the stay's restrictions entirely. The carrier responded within hours. Pat spread the records across the conference table that afternoon and went through them with the focused, unhurried attention of a woman who had learned that the most important thing in any document was usually the thing that looked ordinary. She found it soon. Mitchell had accessed the investigation's procedural disclosure file during his liaison time. The access was brief. Shortly after that access ended, an outgoing email was sent from Mitchell's personal account to an address that resolved through layers of registration to a server managed by Mitchell Baxter's private legal firm. The email contained one attachment. The attachment was a scanned copy of the investigation's procedural disclosure documentation, the exact document that formed the foundation of Baxter's stay motion. Pat set the record down and looked at Marcus. "He photographed it on his phone and emailed it," she said. "Didn't even try to cover it." "He thought he was protected," Marcus said. "He was wrong." Victoria Bennett read the carrier records, set them down, and picked up her phone. She called Mitchell's attorney in the afternoon. She did not warm up to the conversation. She told him what she had, what it meant, and what the federal exposure looked like for a man who had stolen documentation from inside an active federal investigation and delivered it to opposing counsel. She used the word felony several times. She told him his client had until the next morning to decide whether he wanted to cooperate. Then she called the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals and began preparing an emergency motion to vacate the stay based on tainted evidence. Marcus sat at the end of the conference table and let the machinery run. He was thinking about the text message. "If this goes federal, I had nothing to do with what H told me to do at the diner. I was following orders. You were there." Mitchell had written that in the dark at night, drunk on fear, and sent it to the one person who had been standing beside him at the diner. He had not been careful. He had not been strategic. He had been a frightened man reaching for someone to share the weight with, and in doing so, he had signed his own confession. Some men built their own traps without knowing it. Mitchell's attorney called Victoria early the next morning, just before her deadline. Mitchell would cooperate fully. He wanted a plea agreement, reduced counts, reduced sentencing recommendation, full cooperation with the federal investigation going forward. Victoria said she would review the terms. She called Marcus immediately after. Her voice was controlled and precise, the way it got when something significant had shifted. "He's ready to talk," she said. "All of it. Donovan, the arrest, the intermediary, the PAC money." Marcus looked out the office window at the Birmingham skyline. Morning light was cutting hard across the buildings. "Set it up," he said. Mitchell sat across the table from Victoria that afternoon with his attorney beside him and talked for hours without stopping. He confirmed that Donovan had personally directed the arrest. He identified the intermediary who had connected Harlan's political operation to Donovan's department, not Harlan directly, but Harlan's chief of staff, whose name was now in the federal record. He described in precise detail how county forfeiture money had been routed into Harlan's campaign operation through the Briarwood County Law Enforcement Support Fund pass-through. By the time he finished, the stay had been vacated by the 11th Circuit. The investigation was open again, fully, completely. And this time, there was no disclosure gap. There was no technical argument. There was no motion Baxter could file that would put the lid back on what had just been opened. Marcus drove back to Briarwood that evening. He passed the sheriff's department on his way to the motel. The lights were on inside. 2 cruisers were parked out front. He did not stop. He kept driving. The next day was going to be a long day. The grand jury reconvened the morning after the stay was vacated. Marcus did not attend. Grand jury proceedings were closed, and his role now was to wait, which was, in his experience, the hardest part of any investigation. He had spent time building this case brick by brick, and now it was in other people's hands, and there was nothing left for him to do but sit in the courthouse hallway on a wooden bench and drink bad coffee from a vending machine, and trust that the work had been good enough. He sat there for hours. Victoria came out in the afternoon. She walked down the hallway toward him with her jacket over her arm and her legal pad against her chest, and the particular expression on her face of a woman who has just watched something large and inevitable finally land. She sat down beside him on the bench. "Multiple counts," she said, "across several defendants. The marshal's office executes early tomorrow morning." Marcus looked at the far wall for a moment. "All of them?" he said. "All of them." He drove back to Briarwood that night and parked down the street from the sheriff's department and sat in the dark with the engine off. The building was lit from inside, cruisers in the lot. A deputy visible through the front window at the desk. Normal, quiet. A Tuesday night in a county seat that had no idea what the next morning was going to bring. Marcus sat there for some time. Then he drove to the motel and slept well, which was the most he had slept since this began. The federal marshals arrived at Frank Donovan's house early in the morning. Marcus was not there for that either. He heard about it from Pat, who heard it from the marshal's office, who sent a brief field report soon after. Donovan had answered the door himself. He was already dressed, pressed shirt, slacks, shoes laced as if he had known or perhaps simply refused to be caught in anything less than full composure. He had said nothing when they read the charges: multiple counts, obstruction of a federal officer, civil rights violations, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive citizens of constitutional rights. He had placed his hands behind his back and walked to the marshal's vehicle without assistance. The report noted that his wife had watched from the front doorway, that the American flag was visible on the lawn, that the thin blue line ornament sat by the mailbox in the early morning light. Marcus read that detail and thought about a Saturday afternoon and a pair of handcuffs clicking shut on a public sidewalk. He thought about time on a metal bench in a concrete room. He thought about the word misunderstanding coming out of a man's mouth with a smile attached to it. He set the report down. He got dressed. He drove to the federal building. By midday, the machinery was running at full speed, and Marcus stood in the middle of it. Kevin Harper appeared in federal court in the morning and entered his guilty plea on 2 counts. His attorney had negotiated the reduced sentencing recommendation. Harper stood at the defendant's table in a suit instead of a uniform and said the words "guilty" and "guilty" in a voice that was barely above a whisper. His career was over. It had been over since the moment he reached for those handcuffs on a Briarwood sidewalk. It had just taken this long for the paperwork to confirm it. County Commissioner Victor Allen and 2 local judges, Honorable Frank Dawson and Honorable Edward Cole, were indicted on conspiracy and fraud charges by early afternoon. All 3 were processed and released on bond. All 3 declined to comment to the reporters who had materialized outside the federal building by midday, drawn by the specific scent that reporters develop for days when multiple indictments land at once. Mitchell Baxter's disbarment proceedings were initiated by the state bar before the day was out. He would fight them. Marcus already knew he would fight them. Men like Baxter always fought. But the documented leak, Mitchell's email, the carrier records, the scanned disclosure document sent to Baxter's firm shell account was not a matter of interpretation. It was a matter of timestamps. That afternoon, Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside the Briarwood County Sheriff's Department and watched Frank Donovan being walked out of the federal building across the street in handcuffs. Donovan moved the same way he always moved, straight back, controlled, composed. The pleasantness was gone. What remained underneath it was simply a man walking where the marshals directed him to walk. Deputies stood in the doorway of the sheriff's department watching. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them moved. They stood with their hands at their sides and watched their deputy chief put in a vehicle in the same county where he had run everything for many years. Marcus watched too. He thought about the cell tower record, the one ring, the hang-up, the private number dialed from memory. He thought about Reverend Harper's cardboard box and Dorothy Ellis's cash and Darius Thompson, who was a man carrying a felony record that had cost him everything a record can cost a person. He thought about all of it. Then he put his hands in his pockets and walked back to his car. There was still one more thing left to do. The Sunday morning service at Briarwood First Baptist started in the morning. Marcus slipped in through the side door early and took a seat in the back pew before anyone could notice him. The church was full. Every row, the folding chairs along the side walls, people standing quietly at the back in their good clothes with their programs in their hands. Word had traveled through Briarwood the way word travels in small communities, fast and complete. Everyone in this building knew what the recent events had meant. Reverend Harper stood at the pulpit and looked out over his congregation for a long moment before he spoke. Then he reached down beside the pulpit and lifted the cardboard box. He held it with both arms the way Marcus had first seen him hold it, the way you carry something you have carried a long time. He turned it so the congregation could see it. Several people in the front rows recognized it immediately. A woman in a blue hat pressed her hand to her mouth. "For a long time," Harper said. His voice was low and steady and filled the room without effort. "For a long time I've been carrying this box, years of names and dates and statements and evidence that this community was being robbed in broad daylight by the very people paid to protect it." He paused. Years of filing the right paperwork and sending it to the right offices and being told in one way or another that nobody was listening. The church was completely silent. "Somebody listened," Harper said. He walked down from the pulpit and placed the box on the altar with both hands, gently, the way you set something down when you are finally ready to let it rest. Then he straightened up and looked at his congregation, and his eyes moved to the back pew for just a moment. Marcus sat with his forearms on his knees and his jaw tight. He did not look away. Several of the elderly women in the front rows were weeping openly. The man beside Marcus, a stranger, elderly in a brown jacket, was nodding slowly with his eyes closed. Outside, through the high windows, the Alabama morning was blue and clear and indifferent to the particular enormity of what was happening inside this building. Marcus thought about Dorothy Ellis's cache. He thought about Margaret Turner's photographs on the wall. He thought about a young man named Darius Thompson. The letter had been sent to Thompson's Birmingham address on Friday. Victoria Bennett's office had built the parallel case during the final days of the investigation. Mitchell's cooperation statement had identified Thompson by name, confirming what the documentation had suggested. A man pressured into a false confession by methods Donovan's department had refined over years, who had served time in a state prison for a crime he did not commit. Upon release, he had carried a felony record for years. Jobs lost, an apartment denied, a relationship that had not survived the weight of what prison does to a person. He was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in southwest Birmingham. He was standing at his kitchen counter, eating cereal when the letter arrived. He read it once. He set his bowl down. He read it again, slowly, moving his lips slightly over the formal language the way a person does when the words are too important to risk misunderstanding. The letter informed him that his conviction was being formally vacated, that the State Compensation Review Board would receive his file soon, that the Attorney General's office would be in contact. He stood at the counter for a long time. Outside his window, Birmingham went about its day, traffic and pigeons and a child on a bicycle, and the city simply continuing as cities do, without pausing for the private enormity of a single moment in a single kitchen. Darius Thompson put his hands over his face. When he took them away, his face was wet. He was looking out the window at something that wasn't quite the street. It was the first time in years that a door had opened toward him instead of away. Marcus sat across from the Birmingham FBI field office director on a morning. A commendation letter sat on the desk between them. Beside it, a promotion offer, senior supervisory agent, administrative track, a corner office, regular hours, the kind of position a veteran had earned many times over. The director said, "You've earned this, Marcus." Marcus looked at the letter. He thought about Briarwood, about Harper's box on the altar, about Thompson reading a letter at a kitchen counter with his hands over his face. He slid the papers back across the desk. "I appreciate it," he said, "but I'd like to stay in the field." He stood. He buttoned his jacket. He moved to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "We opened pattern reviews on more counties recently," he said. "I'd like to see those through." He walked out. The door closed quietly behind him. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I've picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day. I'm watching from Hong Kong right now. In the quiet aftermath of handcuffs clicking shut on a sunlit sidewalk, one truth rises above every badge, every title, and every calculated lie. Real courage isn't loud or dramatic. It's the steady choice to stand for what's right even when the system itself turns against you. Marcus Reed could have walked away. He could have taken the promotion, the corner office, and the safer path. Instead, he chose to stay in the field, to keep knocking on doors, to keep believing that justice still had a chance in small towns where fear had learned to wear a uniform. That decision reminds us of something deeply human. The most powerful force in any fight isn't money, connections, or political protection. It's ordinary people who finally decide they've had enough of looking away. It's a young deputy who can't sleep at night and chooses to tell the truth. It's an elderly reverend who carries a box of forgotten complaints for years because someone, someday, might actually listen. It's a wife who simply says, "Find him," and a partner who drives through the night without hesitation. This story leaves us with a quiet, aching lesson. Integrity always costs something, but silence costs everything. When we see wrongdoing wrapped in authority, we don't have to be fearless to act. We only have to refuse to stay comfortable. The world changes not because heroes are perfect, but because decent people refuse to stay quiet when it matters most. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about the quiet battles happening in your own community, drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if you witnessed clear injustice from someone in power? I read every single one, and if you want more stories that remind us what real courage looks like, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Tomorrow's story is one you truly don't want to miss. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.